Thanks for tuning in, a very special conversation. It's not often that you have a company in India or maybe anywhere else in the world which has charted successful decades of business growth and shareholder value growth. And it's even rare when you take into account the Indian landscape. A handful of companies would have done this and consistently done it over the years. We have Infosys celebrating 25 years of its listed history, and who better to talk to about the history and maybe a glimpse into what the future could be as well than the man whose companies brought it public way back in 1993. Mr. Vallabh Bhansali, Chairman of Enam Group, with us here. Mr. Bhansali, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
When you got this public, I know everybody talks about, the common folk for is that Infosys IPO wasn't the most successful, but Enam bet on it. Very few people would know or recollect that it's not that you guys brought it public. You had invested into it before the IPO as well. When you did these investments, when you got it public, did you ever think that it would metamorph into a company the way it has become today?
Clearly no. But did we feel that we had betted on something very good? Answer was yes. Had we betted on something that was of national importance? The answer was yes. But that it would multiply thousands of times? Clearly no.
Yeah, but it's one thing to envisage the size that it could become, but two is to try and know that what you are doing is something that will become really, really big. One in terms of size, in two in terms of revenue, three in terms of the kind of prestige that it demands from investors and corporates alike.
Clearly no. And I must say that not because Mr. Murthy looked less, person with any less potential. He looked tremendously tremendously different, thoughtful, full of possibilities, etc. But we didn't know India that time.
Okay.
India had just started to open up, and how things would pan out in that atmosphere was very difficult to imagine. And but for that, I would say that we did think that Mr. Murthy was an extraordinary person, that the field itself of IT software services had huge potential, that whether it would continue to grow at 25% compounded for 15 years and then another 10% and now another, it's continuing to at around that 10% clip. That was not possible. But given our own maturity at that point of time, given the status of the country, the state of the country, it looked exciting.
Interesting. So Infosys is one example. There are maybe a handful of other companies which have probably done this consistently over the years. You've been associated with all of these companies now in various shapes and forms for the last 25 years. Has it surprised you the way India Inc. has grown over the last 25 years? There have been some serious wealth creators and some serious wealth destroyers, as would the case be in any economy, in any capital market. But has this pace surprised you at all, or is this in line with what you would have thought of? Now that you look back.
If I were to look at Vallabh or think of Vallabh in 93,
okay,
I think there would be some amount of surprise. But as I matured and as I understood the process of management, of freedom, my own spiritual path, I'm not surprised at all. I see this as a mathematical paradigm. Unfortunately, our country still does not see it. Let me explain.
Please.
That we did not become independent in 1947. We thought control was freedom. So though we became independent, we wanted to grow in a controlled manner in everything, including our education. So we paying a huge price for that. In 91, when Mr. Narasimha Rao, the genius, the great person, saw the value that, okay, here is an opportunity being pushed by IMF and World Bank to get the hell out of Indians' way. And what that freedom can do, particularly to a people which had the history of being the most prosperous in the world for hundreds of years. We still don't get it. We're still restricting our people. So I don't see this as a surprise at all. It is the potential of freedom given to people inherently capable, imaginative, hardworking, and so on. And when you have a potential of the economy which has been ruined over the last 250 years for a chance to come back to its own old self, nothing great, sky is the limit. So I think if you're finding that, okay, so many companies have been good, it's still nothing. We can have enormously greater number of companies doing extremely well. And I look forward to that day, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if that happens.
Interesting. Do you think embedded in your answer was the freedom being given to people, to thought leaders, etc.? Do you think Infosys has managed to do that over the last 25 years, that which has allowed it to expand so much?
Also, I've said this before, but I think it bears repetition, that Infosys played a very important role in bringing out the significance of freedom given to a businessman.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine if we had not had a leader who was absolutely shining, glistening in values, in ambition, in vision, in innovation, in shareholder value management or value creation, and then shareholder expectation management, etc. Maybe without that totem pole, we would not have had such an exciting time. So not only that Infosys became a great company, but Infosys became a great torchbearer of freedoms used correctly. So I think there's a great value to Mr. Murthy and Mr. Narayan Murthy and Infosys.
Okay, interesting you say that. So does the Infosys currently, and this is no bearing your thoughts on what the current leadership at Infosys would be. I'm just trying to get a sense because of the fact that what Infosys used to do maybe in the 1990s to 2000 decade, which is a lot of firsts to its name, the first half-yearly results, I believe the first quarterly results as well, the first audited set of numbers, etc., etc. Now we have a lot of companies who understand the value of doing, in quote-unquote corporate governance in the best possible way. So is it difficult for an Infosys management now to carve out such firsts for itself in what is arguably a lot more crowded marketplace than what was back then?
Infosys benefited from having a set of extraordinary people at the same time, the founders and then Mohandas Pai and people like them, and therefore their innovation shone brightly for the lack of innovation in other places. But it can still happen. It can still happen.
Okay, you sense that at all? Because for example, this decade, Mr. Bhansali, and again, not casting a shadow of anybody's leadership, etc., but the Infosys of 2011 to 2018, at least in terms of the kind of growth that it has shown, lags far behind. Until 2010, I remember as an analyst and as somebody who used to comment on individual companies on air, Infosys was the unequivocal poster boy of Indian IT. What Infosys said used to happen for the sector. That mantle has now been taken by other companies as well. Is it that Infosys missed out on doing a few things right, or is it that other companies did something better?
I think one has to be philosophic about it. That, like men, companies are also mortal. Companies are after all managed by men. And we will have cycles. More important thing to do is to reflect on what was the design that Infosys created. Say, for example, what values were very important to Infosys. There was a sense of egalitarianism, in the sense that the promoters, the founders, did not treat themselves as a super class. They treated themselves as the same with their employees. They did not take super salaries. Mr. Murthy saw to it that the chairmanship of the AGM was passed amongst directors. First his founders and then the directors. So this sense of egalitarianism led to the kind of decision making and succession planning that actually happened at Infosys. Now, only when history will be written, we will see the value of the experiment that Infosys attempted.
Interesting. And
so, when you said between 11 and 18 they were not practicing some of the innovation that they did earlier, or that did not stand out as much as some of the earlier innovations in the 90s, this is a huge innovation that Mr. Murthy decided to come back, give up very easily, all promoters deciding to walk out, admitting that there was probably an error. Mr. Nandan coming out from his kind of retirement completely. He had not gone to Infosys campus since the day Vishal Sikka took over. So these are the kind of rishis that they are. These are the practices and the stories that will get written about, I'm sure. So I think in the history of a company, in the history of a country, 5, 7, 10 years are nothing. But when you think of values, when you practice those values, they play out at different points of time. So I saw when we started the journey with Infosys, we saw the values. We saw their ability to think of detail, their ability to take risk, their desire to be transparent. I mean, the whole transparency story started with the prospectus itself. They're the only prospectus ever written in India, at least, maybe in the world, which said for the next 3 years, we hope to grow at 50% per annum, make at least a 20% margin on it, and declare a 20% dividend every year. At a time when people said, I mean, unmentionable things, barring unforeseen circumstances, the company hopes to be profitable, etc., and declare a dividend, come from complete vagueness to complete specificity. I think so. There is a whole lot of value system that has been instilled, values vis-a-vis employees, vis-a-vis customers, vis-a-vis shareholders, vis-a-vis management. And I think between 11 and 18, the importance of Mr. Narayan Murthy is taking up the issues in a bold manner. A lot of people got irritated. Someone very ridiculously said, "Old man, go away." What are they telling? They are talking about, don't be inconvenient. Don't ask uncomfortable questions. Don't upset the apple cart. That's not how Infosys gets created. So a lot of those things are, alive and kicking, and they're being handled in a very mature manner.
Interesting. I have two follow-ups to that, Mr. Bhansali. Firstly, about this, whether the landscape right now permits itself for companies to be able to come out and give that vision that we want to grow at X percentage over the course of the next 4 or 5 years, or whatever, 10 years, as the case may be. And two, at a time when a lot of world leaders are now weighing in on why is it that companies need to give guidance? I mean, Warren Buffett was on record saying that it might be detrimental to shareholders if companies come out and give guidance. Where are you on this whole argument, specifically for IT companies, because they were the ones who actually started off giving, or Infosys essentially started off giving guidance quarter after quarter?
Firstly, Mr. Buffett is about quarterly guidance. He is asking CEOs not to get away from guidance if they chose to give, but to go away from quarterly, because that's not how you manage, that's all. So
Okay.
I think the second, I think it is, all times are difficult for those who do not know how to manage them. All times are easy for those who know how to manage them. And when you are transparent, it's not about spectacular growth. It is about just saying that, look, this is how we see the landscape, this is how we are going to navigate, this is the result that we hope to obtain. And this is classic management. If a management does not have objective, which it pursues, and then it wants to be opportunistic, then, as people say, oh, everyone is a visionary in retrospect.
Interesting.
So, Infosys wanted to set up different. So I think it continues to be possible for those who have that kind of confidence, who have that kind of sacrifice at their heart, that kind of modesty to go wrong and admit it. I think the trouble is that we don't have the modesty to go wrong. We don't have the ambition to aspire for something very big.
Do you think the Infosys of today has that?
That's not the question. I do not work with Infosys as closely as I used to 25 years ago.
Okay.
And so therefore I would not be able to.
Okay.
But
India Inc?
India Inc. again, is a multi-hued India Inc. There are people who are extremely ambitious. The story of Mr. Anil Agarwal is right before us. Around the same time, I did the first major IPO for, in '94 for Mr. Anil Agarwal. He was not a rated person at all. People were very reluctant to look at him. But we saw tremendous ambition in the person. And how has Sterlite and Vedanta's standing changed over 25 years? So I think there are people even today who are extremely ambitious. We have had a case like Dalmia Bharat, that in a few years they built a superb cement company. We had Narottam Seksaria. I go back to yesteryears. So I think they keep happening.
Yeah.
I think more will happen in India.
Inshallah, as they say.
Inshallah, I think if we continue this kind of good economic management of the country, I hope we do not go back to crazy days.
Yeah, I hope so too. Mr. Bhansali, a conversation on Infosys can't be complete without talking about one forgetful incident, let's put it that way. And I know sides are divided out there, but the Narayan Murthy Vishal Sikka spat, if I can call it that, you can call it whatever. But are there definitive lessons that one can learn out of that, both from a corporate governance perspective, from how boards behaved and how boards could behave? Because currently, the kind of actions that boards are taking or not taking, the whole spate about what auditors are doing and not doing is out there in the open for everybody to dissect. What are your thoughts here?
I think our country, unfortunately, though we have Satyameva Jayate as our motto, there's a lot that is, desirable in this field, particularly the institution of independent directors and independent board. We don't really see the kind of fearless independence that is expected. Maybe the system does not make it easy. The system does not probably, encourage or protect them in a manner. So I think we need to rethink the whole. I do not mean to be harsh against any one individual or any one company, but it's an everyday phenomenon that the independent directors, look at our whole regulation itself. I am reminded of a classic statement made by Dhirubhai. When this all corporate governance, stuff became the lingua franca and everyone talked much about it, whether they understood it or not. Dhirubhai once classically asked, and he was told that now we'll have this rule and that rule, and he got exasperated and he said, is there a rule that a company has to be profitable? This is the pithy wisdom of the man. That today, the director is so much worried about whether you complied with that rule or that, this practice or that practice and this form. He is bogged down by, compliance and the kind of penalty that the director has to suffer. I am on one of the companies. The company had a shareholder had to, bring down the shareholding within some limit. The shareholder failed to, despite the best attempt. You cannot auction your shares. Now, therefore, there was some technical violation. Now, the rule says that you should haul the independent director and everybody. Now, when the director could do nothing, okay, you serve some notice, etc. The company goes and compound the violation, and the company itself was not at fault, but company says, all right, I have to get on with life in India and the regulators and the bureaucrats. So the company goes and does it. But the directors are still left high and dry. So when you have an environment, when you have rule making and rule enforcement of this kind, how can you have fantastically fierce independent directors and yet expect that the board should be independent? So I think we need serious discussion on this institution of directors. We need institutions that can mint such custodians. And we have to have custodians in every aspect, whether it is the government, whether it is the municipality, whether it is an independent, whether it is a listed company. This custodianship of the public partnership, people with independent voice and wisdom, and those who will ask questions like Dhirubhai, first tell me, are you profitable? Are you efficient? And not just complying with the rules like clerks.
Okay.
So a lot is needed.
Lot is needed, as is always would be the case. Mr. Bhansali, I knew I wouldn't end this interview without taking a couple of questions with you about what lessons of investing regards to the facets of investing that one can take out of the leaf of 25 years of Infosys. I know that the old adage of, invest for the long term is always there, but any specific thing that young investors can learn out of 25 years of Infosys, and you being a long-term proponent of long-term investing?
Firstly, young investors are very smart, so I do not want to hold a candle.
They all
to
still want opinion, Mr. Bhansali, I can assure you that.
So, long-term investment is possible only in those companies which are in fields which has long-term potential. Where you see a cyclical or a short-term opportunity, you cannot be a long-term investor. So very important to see the size of opportunity and the durability of the opportunity. That's number one. Number two, investment is risky, and therefore you must do it with people who are trustworthy. And the trustworthiness must show in the disclosures, in the way they deal with shareholders, etc., etc. So Infosys did all of that. Business is competitive, and therefore a company must show innovation. Infosys showed great innovation. Firstly, the global delivery model, and then came innovations like not only in accounting and all, but innovation like the whole Mysore Leadership Institute, the largest of its kind in the world. So whether you are going to innovate or not, and then of course you must have a bench of management. So, how you treat your employees, how you cultivate management, so succession planning and management planning. And then you must have a product which strives to be excellent and lead in the market. So you need these 4 or 5 features to really be a long-term investor in a stock.
Okay. My last question, Mr. Bhansali, and it can't end without a question on Infosys. And now I know you said that you're not as closely associated with Infosys as you were in the past. But as I said, we respect both sides of the opinion, right? So I saw that piece that you had written, I think last year or the year before last, wherein you mentioned of you being in Mr. Murthy's shoes and how would you think. My question to you would be, sir, that Infosys here on, I mean, whenever there has been a problem of sorts, let's put it that way, we've had one of the founder members who has built this company come back, steady the ship and then move on. Can the Infosys over the next 25 years or the next 5 years or the next 10 years, I don't know what kind of vision what any would have, move ahead without how do I say it, without the founders coming back at the first sign of trouble, so to say? I'm not saying it's a bad thing or a good thing, but
so let us understand what Mr. Nilekani has done. Has he brought the founder magic as such back to the company? No, I think the founders have left systems and values in the company so deeply entrenched at various levels that he doesn't have to recreate any of them. I think there was issue at the board level at Infosys, and I think which needed fixing. The board needed better leadership primarily. And I think Nandan has brought that board level leadership. The board is still undergoing some changes. And second, I think Mr. Murthy had nothing against Mr. Sikka as much as against the board. As I wrote in that article, that it is the job of the CEO to be enterprising. Sometimes he'll make mistake, he will overreach, etc. But the board cannot just eat out of his hand or her hand. So the board fails to do that. If the board is not educated, board is not hardworking, etc., etc. I think that was the issue. So I think the founders will not be long enough. How much ever I wish that they be here forever, they won't be here. So the company will have to learn, and the company has enough of their legacy, enough and more of their legacy to really build on. And I hope that Nandan is there long enough to rule out the need for any such further intervention.
Okay. Mr. Bhansali, really appreciate you taking the time, having us in your office and giving us the chance to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining in today. And viewers, thanks for tuning in to this very special episode.